Hi, comic book fans, and welcome to another suddenlycomics.com video. And we got a really interesting episode. The main thing is Alan is not going to show any copies of Miss Mask. So we're having a discussion show, and we're discussing is there a recession? Is there a recession in the comics market, which we've discussed on Alan's show, and we're following through onto my show, and we're talking about what are the consequences for the comic community. You know, what are the implications, and have we got any recommendations on how to react to a declining price in comic market, because we've had a rising price for 2 years and we're beginning to see a bit of a decline in price. So as a member of the comics community, if you're watching this, you probably are, how should you be reacting? And that's what we're going to cover off in this show. And I'm going to get Alan to make some comments first. So
one of the things that, like, I'm a collector, so I'm always going to approach things from that collector's standpoint. There's a couple things that I have. I have one concern and one positive. Okay. So my first concern, and I'll get into this, and this happened in the 90s. I remember this happening in the 90s. You had a whole bunch of people, like newbies, coming to the comic market. And when the comic market crashed in the 90s, a whole bunch of people left that market. And the market got a lot smaller, like really, really tiny. And that's one of my concerns. That is a personal concern, that we're going to have that same effect. Right now, comics are a little bit hot, because, we had those historical climbs. Like, it was like every week, oh, the price doubled. I wish I could have gotten it last week, and, and people always were like inflating the price. It just kept on going up. That's my concern. One is that people will be driven out of the market. The second concern, the positive, though, that I see as a collector is a lot of those speculators are being driven out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what we're getting into maybe a little bit more realistic pricing, and it is a buying opportunity.
It is. I'm just gonna add to that. I'm going to respond to a couple of things there. First of all, one of the things that I've seen, I think has happened, is one of the sectors of the market, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, and they're there, and that it is flippers, and they've had a really good 2 years, because in a rising market, if you're a flipper, you can't, you're going to make money. So a flipper wants to buy a comic, sell it quickly, and make money. In a rising market, it's a flipper's dream, because everything is going up. It's going up quickly. I can buy a comic this week, I can sell it next week, and I've made some money. Yeah. And what happens with that is it's a bit like a bubble to a certain extent. If you're careful, you get into a bubble. So what happened with black tulips back in the 13th century is everybody started, people would go, oh, black tulips have gone up double in the last week. I better buy some black tulips so I can sell them more the week after. And people are just buying black tulips from each other until somebody goes, what actual use are black tulips? And then suddenly it's like a pyramid scheme that all collapses. And I think we had flippers selling to flippers, selling to flippers, selling to flippers, taking prices up. Yeah. Like that. Now, that works fine in a rising market. What happens when you've got a declining market and you're a flipper? You're going to stop buying, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because the market's doing that. If you buy now, you're not going to be able to flip it in a week's time for more money. You're probably going to get less money. So the flipper, it becomes an endangered species. And I think there are some flippers out there who are stuck, who are the ones holding it at the end, and now the market's gone down. I need cash. What am I going to do? And they're going to have to sell at a loss. It's what happens in the stock market when people take all these options on things, and suddenly they've got to sell all their options at a loss. And I think this is why we are seeing quite a lot of some of these rarer books coming up onto the market. You know, when you go and look at the last Heritage auction, there were about 8 Hulk 181s.
No, that was Comic Connect.
Comic Connect. You know, there were loads of Fantastic 452s, you know, and I think this is the flippers who've got here and gone, oh my God, the market's going down. I better unload everything.
Yep. Yeah, I think we're going to have that situation where all the flippers will kind of leave the market and they'll dump their books.
Yeah.
And there'll be like for maybe like 3-4 months, maybe even 6 months, we'll have like a buying bonanza where collectors will be like, wow, I always wanted this book. Now I can get 6 copies of it. I think it's absolutely fantastic. But I think it's a really good, the next 6 months should be a real good time for collectors. Like me. You and I don't sell our comics, you know. Yeah.
We buy them and we don't sell them. So this is a perfect time for us, you know, because I've already bought a number of key comics in the last month or 2 that I haven't been able to afford, you know, because people are taking offers, you know. Only this afternoon.
And they never took offers before.
No, only this afternoon I bought a Fantastic Four 52 UK price variant, of course, you know, and the guy got it on at a pretty good price, and I went under 20% under what he was offering, and he took it, you know. So.
You know, there's a thing in the market, like stock market. You buy on fear. And what'll happen is, especially with the flippers, they're afraid. You know, ultimately, a flipper doesn't really appreciate the book. You know, they just see it as a, you know, oh, I can make money from it, whatever.
Commodity.
It's commodity. So they don't have that deep appreciation for the book. So what they're going to think is like, oh my goodness, am I going to lose everything? And what you will see with the stock market, what you'll see with comics as well, is that fear setting in. And those flippers will be like, if I can just get $1 for this book, you know what I mean? Like, where they don't have any intrinsic value that a collector would have to the book, they will just get whatever they can for it just to have something from it, where they don't lose their complete shirt. They just, you know, so I think that's what we're going to see. And we're going to see a lot of really great bargains in the next few months, where these flippers are going to be like, okay, I'll take whatever you offer me for this book.
I'm just going to cut my losses.
Yep. And I actually, speaking of heritage auctions, I bought a crazy amount of stuff from the last heritage auctions. And I was buying some really great golden age stuff at really great prices. And I was like, this, like I bought one that normally is like a $400 or $500 book, $150. You know, and it's not like one that you see often. It's not one, yeah. It's sort of like, I'm seeing stuff where it's really exciting for me.
Yeah. It's
going to be hard on my bank account for a little while because I'm going to be buying so much crazy stuff. But, you know, I just love what you can get. You know, it's like, it's crazy, you know, and it's books that I know will go back up because there are always going to be collectors for those books.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. So this is, so, you know, it's a bad time for flippers. If you're a flipper, I'm sorry. You're a perfectly valid species, you know.
Yeah.
I'm all for diversification of species. And, you know, if you're a flipper, good on you. You know, you've brought money into the market, you make it interesting, but I'm afraid you're going to have a tough 6 to 12 months. If you're a collector, yeehaw, you know.
Yeah.
Because the prices are going to come down. And I think on some of the hyped books, they'll come down significantly, you know.
Oh, yeah.
If you're sitting on any stuff that's gone up because it's been hyped by spec, it's going to come down significantly. So
yeah, I would say like the last 3-4 years was a flippers market. Now we're in a collector's market.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a very different market.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. There's a I'm into like a lot of political things and stuff like that. There's a very famous economist, Milton Friedman, and it's one of those things like when you spend your own money, you will try to get the best, thing for the dollar. You best value out of that dollar. Well, a flipper isn't really spending their own money. They're spending somebody else's money because they're saying, okay, I know what the market is going to do. I'm gonna gamble against it and blah blah blah. They're gambling. They're playing that risk, and they don't really see the value in what they're buying. So they will just spend more than what they should for that book. So during the whole spec market, you got that whole inflated value thing because they don't really understand the value of the book that they're buying. Whereas a collector, as I said, they really know each value, and they really know, okay, there's this many on the census. There's, this is a really key character. Like they know everything about that book, and they know exactly to the penny how much that book should be worth. And so what we'll see is a much more realistic pricing built into the books. Now, that doesn't mean that the books are going to drop back to what we saw in 2018. I don't think we're going to get back to that low.
No, because a number of people and I don't think this is the 90s, by the way,
Yeah, me either.
It's not the same. The problem with the 90s was they were printing 8 million comics.
Yeah. It was overproduction.
Crazy. And all those Ma and Pop stores that collapsed and fell, that's not going to happen. We didn't get that explosion in volume. I hope, for goodness, we get rid of having 40 variant covers.
That I would like to see. I actually think that one good thing is with the supply chain issues that we're having, they're actually cutting back because they're having problems printing that many.
Yeah.
So,
I've got a problem with 2 or 3 variant covers, but 40 variant covers. I mean, come on, guys.
The worst for that is Dynamite. I love Dynamite. I love Dynamite a lot. Like every time a new issue comes out, there's like 20 variants.
That's because you keep buying them all, Alan.
Oh man, it is insane. I'm like, how many? Like, but they're all great covers. I do love them, but it gets a bit pricey after a while.
And you need a new house to keep them in eventually.
Yeah, basically. So I see that changing too, where we won't have as many variant copies. Another thing is variant copies do appeal to flippers because they like to get all the variants because they know that there will be speculators and they'll be, oh, this is the hot cover and you got to get this one. And that I think will fade a bit. So it'll be an interesting time in terms of that. I don't know exactly how that's going to pan out, but I think it'll be interesting. I wonder, and I'm curious what your opinion on this is. One of the things that I saw in other times, and I worry about this happening now, is if you look at the 2000s, early 2000s, the market was dead for comics. It was a really bad time for comics.
Yeah.
And even as a publisher, the print runs in the early 2000s are really low. And it's because when there's a hype in the market, well, that brings a whole bunch of people into buying the new modern comics. And so what I'm worried about, and this is like, I'm going to put it out to you, is that we're not, like right now, the market is actually small. Like print run nowadays is around 50,000.
Yeah.
Back in the 90s, it's like 1 million.
Yeah.
And those are that's the ratio. My concern is this is 50,000 at a time when the market is hot. So I'm worried that if the market kind of tanks a bit, what we're going to see is print runs of maybe 5,000, where there's just, and the DC Marvel are going to back off their books, producing books. And I'm worried that, there'll be more emphasis on digital and on other ways that you can cut those printing costs. Mm-hmm. So that's one of my concerns that, will this hurt that modern development of comics?
I'm not. I'm not as worried about that because I'm a great believer in survival of the fittest. So
Mhm.
I think what happens there is the quality survives because people will buy the quality, yeah, and all the
Mhm.
dross dies,
Mhm.
so yes, there may be some shrinking of the number of titles, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Do we need 12 Batman titles and 4 Venom, every variation of Venom and Carnage and
There's like too many. Yeah.
you know so for me, I think that's relatively healthy to have a bit of a retrenchment and concentrating on quality.
Yeah.
And one of the things it's not like the 90s for me either, because I think some of the people who've come into the market in the last 4 or 5 years are not here for the short term. I think we've had people come in from the stock market. I think we've had people come in from other collectibles such as sports card trading.
Yeah.
And they've moved into the comic market not just for the short term. That the hedge fund manager who's bought his Batman
Action. Yeah.
Comics 27 hasn't bought
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
sell it next month. He's bought it, stick in a vault, and be part of his asset portfolio for 15 years. So, and the sports card collectors, so they've been sitting on their Joe DiMaggios for years. So, they're not
Yeah.
going to
So
halt.
I see that you're right about that, but I think that's more about the blue chips and
Yeah.
older books.
Yeah, it is.
I'm worried. I'm more worried about the new books. What I actually see is happening, and we already see this to a certain extent, is both Marvel and DC have gone woke, and I talk about wokeism a lot, and I'm personally very against it because I see it as Marxist and blah blah blah. But that's not really my complaint about it. What I see it is it's bad writing often, and people don't read those books. They don't like those books, and so what I'll see, I think the first fat that they'll trim is that woke, the diversity hire, the people that are just writing for agenda's sake, and I think that will get trimmed out. And I think the big publishers, they'll have a reckoning where they don't really know if they can even stay afloat, because they have gone woke, and they really have to house clean, and that's going to be a big shakeup at some of these big publishers. But what I do see happening is the Kickstarter phenomena, where a lot of these independent guys are going to be like, screw you, I'm going to self-publish.
Yeah.
I'm going to produce something that's people will like.
Yeah.
I'll produce something that I enjoy, that is for the fan, that is. So I think what we'll see is like really small publications. And I think we'll have a rise of that where they like, I buy Zombie Tramp, right? Zombie Tramp, nobody buys Zombie Tramp. It's a small niche group of people. Okay. But when they launched the recent version of Zombie Tramp on Kickstarter, within one day, the guy raised over half $500,000.
Yeah.
And it's insane how much, and that's like a few thousand people buying.
Yeah, I've been on there and done a couple of fun, Kickstarter things.
Yeah, so my point is like the Kickstarters, and so what you have is a very small group of collectors that are diehards will buy those comics, and what we'll see is maybe 2 years of really low print runs. Like I'm talking like under 1,000. Like that's really low print run.
Very low.
And then what'll happen is years later, when the market kind of recovers and people kind of go, oh, what were the cool books? Those ones that were kind of these ones that were passion projects that were built out of like love of comics, because they'll be so incredibly rare.
Yeah.
They're going to be books that are going to become super valuable in the future, because there'll be a much bigger market to kind of buy those books, and there just won't be that many of those books to be found. I mean, that's why I was recommending people spec on 2000 to 2010 books, because if there was anything good from that era, which there wasn't really that much, but if there was anything good from that era, those are the books that are really low print runs, and they're really hard to find.
Yeah.
So, and I see what we're having now is even more exaggerated version of that. So that's kind of one of the ramifications I think we will see, and that's like modern take. I'm like, I know the gold ones and the blue chips from the past will, they'll hold their value and they'll be valuable in the future. But what will happen with this modern stuff is a little bit weird. And I think, this is my crystal ball again, where I see this kind of happening, where we get this kind of Kickstarter effect. I'm just putting it out there.
Yeah, that's perfectly valid. I mean, I've already seen it. You can see. I mean, there's a, and I don't buy. If I'm buying new comics, probably 10-20% of what I buy is Marvel and DC. 80% is indie, small stuff, because I just enjoy reading it more.
And there's some really great titles. You like the series Rain, for example.
Yeah, I love that.
And there's some really good titles where there's a fan base for that, because they're producing stuff for readers, for people that will actually enjoy the books. So and what I recommend is reject the ones that are these kind of woke crap things, and focus on buying books. If you're trying to buy modern, because modern's more affordable, buy the books that you will enjoy reading, and that your kids will enjoy reading, and that people in general will enjoy reading.
I mean, one of the things that annoys me, I look at quite a lot of modern, and the art all looks the same.
Yeah.
It's
not the best. It's really low quality.
It's low quality.
The covers are amazing, but the interiors really low.
What do I want to? And the ones that I like is where the artwork inside I go, oh, that's really good. I like that.
Yeah, I think I was showing one by Silk. It's it's the name of the artist.
Yeah.
And the cover is brilliant, but the interior art is as good as the cover.
Oh, right.
So,
that's good.
and you're like, oh, wow, this is a really great book.
But that's why I love the 60s Marvel stuff, because you've got a Jack Kirby cover and you open it up and you've got Jack Kirby inside it.
Yeah.
The inside is just as good as the cover.
Yeah.
It's Steve Ditko, and each panel is a bit of unique comic art, and I can tell their styles. They've got a style that I can look at and I can say that's Steve Ditko, or that's.
That's a very 60s Silver Age phenomena. If you look at I collect Golden Age, right? So Golden Age, they almost had the attitude.
They tried to get them to do it the same,
all the same. It was very interesting. But the artwork, the internal artwork was pretty major. It was pretty awesome. They would always have a crazy cover, but the interior was as crazy or even more crazy.
Wow,
which is
it
was pretty awesome. So I love Golden Age. But you are right, where the 60s was really about personality, selling the books. They would really oh, this is a Steve Ditko book, this is a Jack Kirby, and they would actually hype that personality rather than the book itself even. So I think in terms of what I'd be curious, what's your opinion? How long do you think this is going to last, this recession?
18 months.
Really? It's real. I see it as a domino effect. Normally it's the dominoes kind of knocked down, and then with this is what we've seen is a whole bunch of things happened, and then we got this big war in Ukraine, and people always say, oh, it's the war in Ukraine that caused it. No, it was before that. So, but what I see is the war in Ukraine is maybe being that force that can flip the dominoes back right up. You know what I mean? Where it can kind of pop them back up. Because if the war in Ukraine gets sorted out, then people will be like, okay.
Some of the biggest recoveries in world history are after wars.
Oh yeah, the booms.
Yeah.
That's why they're called the baby boomers, because there was this massive, boom that happened after
World War II. Yeah.
Yeah. But
and you had the Roaring Twenties after World War One.
Yeah. So not that I want to have a war just so that we can have a recovery, but I'm hoping that this war will end soon. And I think it's not going to end the way the media is saying that it'll end, but it is. And it's really actually the only thing that's holding the war on right now is the US government. The US government is prolonging the war, which is kind of weird.
Because it's providing weaponry to the Ukrainians?
Well, they're providing that idea that, this war has to be won. And I don't think it was ever meant to be won. Because I think the Russians, they didn't really want Ukraine. Like, despite what the media says and all this kind of stuff, they never wanted Ukraine. They only wanted those little eastern areas. And if you look at the whole Russian campaign, they always controlled that little spot. And everything else was sort of a false flag. It actually was really it wasn't even about taking Kiev or anything like that. It was all about diverting, stopping troops from reinforcing that eastern bloc. And I think the Russians, all they want is that little piece. And if they get that little piece, they'll hold it and just stay there as long as they can. Because it's a buffer. That's all they're looking for. They're looking for a buffer state. And I think they will hold it as long as they can. And as long as Americans keep on funding, that fact, we're going to win this war. It's one of those wars you'll never win. Because they can stay there and just sort of sit there as long as they want.
Yeah.
So it's really up to the US to say, hey, let's stop. Let's just stop. But once they do that, I think it'll end. It'll be one of those kind of armistice where they say, we'll give you these little bits of, little bit of Ukraine, and then we'll call, at least you didn't get all of Ukraine, and they'll say that they got a victory out of it. The Russians will say that they got a victory out of it. Everybody's happy, not really, but, and it's just like, that's what I see is happening. But it's how long will the governments basically prolong it is really, and, I think things have to get a little bit harder before they will decide to end it. A bit more food shortages, a bit more oil shortages. Once that, hits in, then, and people say, I'm voting against it. I'm voting against you for maintaining it. Then the governments will flip, and then we'll get Ukraine sorted out. Then the dominoes will come back.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I mean, the Ukrainian war ending could actually could reverse the situation.
That's my point. Yeah. And Ukrainians buy lots of comics, so that's why we. No, this has nothing to do with comics, but it will bring back to comics because ultimately, if the recession ends, there will be another boom. And there'll also be that inflation where I see books, like if we have you said 15% inflation in the UK. Well, that means that, something that I bought for $1 is actually now 85 cents.
Yeah.
And so what'll happen is as inflation those books have to kind of come back up just for inflationary to get back to the real price. Yeah. Yeah. So I see that as happening too. So
Right. Okay. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson in economics and political geography from a Canadian and a Brit. Hopefully next week we'll get back to talking. You might see us show a comic or two. Okay. Thanks, Allan.
Okay. Bye.
Next week.